Steve wanted an apple. And he wanted an apple because the logo that he had previously was an illustration of Isaac Newton underneath an apple tree with an apple in his hands. It wasn't an icon. And he was looking for something simple, something iconic, and something that would just very quickly say apple. They had created a glossary of terms. And one of the terms inside of there is the word bite. But not spelled like the way you would spell bite, but it was B-Y-T-E, bite. Or you could say bit. So the fact that the Apple logo has a bite relates to the fact that we were working with a technology company. We looked at the variations of different ways of biting into the apple. I remember exploring the possibilities that could have teeth marks. But eventually we went with something even simpler than that and just simply a curve that was basically the same shape as the leaf. In my mind, was developing it, playing around with those shapes, I made the leaf the same shape as the bite. So that if you take the bite of the apple and you put it up on top, it became the leaf. That's the way that whole thing was developed. I still have my original sketches.
Today's creator is Carlos Perez David, a creative director, graphic illustrator, and artist known for his collaboration in creating the iconic Apple logo. Born in Mexico City and raised in Stockton, California, Carlos is a first-generation college graduate who was part of the team that created the Apple logo. He's credited with hand-drawing the first version of the apple with the missing piece. In this episode, you'll learn about Carlos's remarkable journey from being a farm worker to playing a pivotal role in creating one of the most recognizable logos of all time. Hey Carlos, how's it going? Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, it's an honor to be asked to be on your podcast.
No, sir, the honor's all mine simply because I've always respected the generations that had come before me. I know that I stand in the shoulders of giants and you're one of those giants. And I first found out about you not that long ago, to be quite honest with you. It was several months ago, maybe back in November. I was scrolling through TikTok and somebody posted one of your videos, one of your interviews, and it immediately caught my attention because the hook of the video was something like Mexican American is involved in the creation of the iconic Apple logo. And I was like, what? I've never heard about this. And it was like a 3-4 minute video. It talked all about you. And immediately I bookmarked the video and I said, oh, I got to talk to Carlos at some point. And here we are 4 months later. So thank you so much for accepting the invitation.
Thank you as well. The person that posted that, she did it completely on her own. It had nothing to do with it other than she took it upon herself to tell the story that of who was involved in the creation of the Apple logo. And it was Rob Ranoff, myself, and then we give credit to Tom Kawafuji for the stripes of the original logo,
right?
Which was the 6 color stripes.
I definitely want to talk all about that, and I do want to get to that. But before we do that, I want to go back to the beginning because I think it's very important for people to understand where you came from and where you ended up. And I was telling you this off air, but I was doing research about you. I always do research about my guests. I want to be informed about who they are, what their passions are. And in reading your story, it was so impactful to me because I couldn't believe the amount of similarities you and I had. We both were born in Mexico. We immigrated to the San Francisco Bay Area. We both had a passion for drawing and art as children. As I understand, you were the first person in your family to go to college, and so was I. You started at a community college. You went to Delta, if I'm not mistaken, here in California, Northern California. And I went to Chabot College in Hayward, California. And then I went to Cal State East Bay. You went to San Jose State, which are part of the same school system. It's so weird that everything I read about you, I was like, oh my God, that happened to me. Oh my God, it happened to me. You were a farm worker. I was only a farm worker for one day. I'll tell you more about that story if you like. All these different things, even with that time difference, it's incredible how it seemed like our paths are very similar. So I guess we can start by just simply letting people know a little bit about your story. Tell me a little bit about where you grew up. Tell me a little bit about how you started getting into artwork, how your family was involved, and eventually maybe lead up to how you got into the U.S. and to the Bay Area and all that stuff.
Sure. So I was born in Mexico City in 1951. I was raised there until the age of 3. And my mom decided to leave and go back to her hometown of in Chante, Jalisco. That's where I actually grew up as a little kid. My mom had come to the States to find work so that she could send money back to support us while we were staying with our family. My aunts had noticed that she seemed to show some interest in the creative process. And we happened to have in the family a tia that was an artist. They said that they wanted me to start going on every Saturday to be taught by my aunt, Lola, her name was, and she would show me different techniques. And basically the instruction from my aunt was sit, enjoy the moment, and have fun with it. And then also what transpired was that my aunt had told me that there was going to be a play that was going to be performed and that they were looking for a child that can play a monkey. So she and I worked together to actually assemble a costume for myself so that I could put it on and display it. That was a really very special moment for me because I got not only be creative, but also to play out being a monkey. And apparently I must have been pretty good at it.
So tell me a little bit about your move to the US. How old were you? How did that happen?
About 1957, 58 time frame, my mom moved us to another aunt that we had in Tijuana. And my mom was working already. She was working in north of San Diego for a doctor because my mom had been a nurse back in Mexico City and also in Stockton, Jalisco. She had worked for the Cruz Roja and she had learned how to be a nurse. And that worked out for her. She was able to save enough money to pull together so that she could go through the process of getting us immigration cards, little green cards that were called alien cards, which I thought was always interesting that it was called an alien card.
By the way, I had those same ones. You said you were in Tijuana, so I actually was born in Mexicali, which is a few hour drive away from Tijuana, a few hours east.
Yeah.
So I also had those alien cards. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. And by 1960, my mom had acquired those documents and we jumped on a Greyhound bus. She said that she was going to bring us to Stockton, California. And it was a very exciting and very moment when we arrived. I remember just thinking, wow, this is like a metropolis. Because I used to read a lot of comic books by this time. The word metropolis, something that was in the comic books with
Sure.
Superman and Batman and Dick Tracy.
What was your favorite comic book growing up?
Dick Tracy, for sure.
Dick Tracy?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I thought he was the coolest guy.
Yeah.
It seemed very real to me. It wasn't like a Batman that was flying around or a Superman. He was a real hometown sort of person that was fighting the bad guys and stuff like that. When I got to Stockton as a little kid, I was 10 years old. Of course, I didn't speak a bit of English at all.
Right.
And it was very foreign to me. The language seemed almost unbearable to listen to.
Right.
Because I couldn't understand a word. It sounded like Charlie Brown's adult speaking. Wah, 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 wah. That's what it sounded like to me. By the time I learned English, then things began to go, I think, pretty normal. I was pretty much an average grade student. I started to get involved in track and field and cross country. And those activities were very helpful. I got a lot of discipline. My mom was a single parent raising the two of us, and we didn't really have a male influence, but I was able to get that from my coaches. When I got to Delta, that's when I think that really things began to flourish for me as an artist. Initially, I was thinking that I wanted to go maybe into drafting. So I was taking drafting classes, but at the same time, I was still pursuing my drawing abilities and my artistic abilities and taking art classes there. And I had a counselor that he says, Carlos, you should go into graphic design. And I said, why? He goes, because it incorporates everything that you have passion for. You have a passion for photography, you have a passion for drawing and being an artist, and you have a passion for the technical aspects of it. You have really good discipline to be able to do that. And there's an excellent school that I would be great if you can get into their art and design program called San Jose State. In 1972, I got a letter in the mail saying that I had been accepted to the art
That's
and design
incredible.
program of San Jose State. I took everything you can imagine that was related to art. I learned how to silk screen. I learned how to do printmaking. Printmaking was actually my minor, and my major was actually graphic design initially. At the end of the curriculum for graphic design in 1974, the faculty chose 3 portfolios as the top 3 portfolios of the class. And I happened to be one of those 3 people.
Wow.
Those 3 people were giving apprenticeships working for an agency somewhere in the Valley. And lo and behold, I get a call from the senior art director at Regis McKenna advertising agency in Palo Alto that they were interested in having me come down for an interview.
Wow.
And so I went down there and I met with the senior art director. His name was Hall Kelly. And Hall Kelly hired me on the spot.
How old were you at the time?
At the time, I must have been about 21.
Okay, so very young.
Yeah, I was about 21, 22 years old. But in about a year later, after I did my apprenticeship at Regis, I get a call back from a fellow by the name of Dave Takigawa, who happened to be the right-hand person for Regis McKenna. And he called me in. He goes, hey, Regis is going to be opening up a marketing communications department as part of the agency. And so we're looking for graphic design talent. How would you like to come back and work for us? And so I went down there, spoke with him. He hired me on the spot. The department became known the Graphic Conclusion, but it was under the umbrella of Regis McKenna Advertising Agency. And I was working as an illustrator. One day we saw this person walking in. He looked pretty much like a hippie, but we all looked very hippie back in the 70s. We all had long hair and we all had that sort of mentality and that look. And so it wasn't out of the ordinary, but I think that what was odd was that this guy, he just looked like maybe he was just someone coming in from the streets, and we didn't really know who it was. But it turned out to be Steve Jobs that was coming in to visit with Regis and wanted to see if the agency would be willing to take his account. So this is the part where being at the right place at the right time comes into play. By 1976, Regis had been handed the account and we were off and running. We had about 2 years time frame because they wanted to launch the company in that time frame, within that 2-year time frame. And so we were able to launch the company not only as a company, but also as their products. We launched their 2 products, Apple II and the Disk II, which was the floppy disk unit that attached to the system. And at the time, the system didn't have color. It only had 1 megabyte of capacity, so it wasn't very much. It was really maybe a glamorized typewriter with abilities to be able to project image onto the screen, black and white image, and calculations. But it really couldn't do the graphic work yet. That didn't come until later. Steve Jobs and Wozniak, we called them the 2 Steves. We rarely would see Wozniak because he was really back at the fort putting together components and stuff like that. But Steve Jobs was the front man, and he was the one that was the marketing, if you will, person of the agency initially. And he came out and spoke to us, gave us what his vision was and what his directive was and what his mission statement.
Can you summarize what those directives were?
Yeah. He said, I want you guys to know that we're going to ride a wave of about, he sort of anticipated 5 to 10 years before people would catch up to him. He kind of figure that. And to summarize it, he basically was looking for us to position his company into 4 main areas. 1, education. 2, being able to calculate on the computer your tax returns or running your business. So it was business related, the second one. The third one was the ability to maybe play games. And at the time, they did have Pong on that machine so that you could actually play Pong on it. The fourth thing is that it needed to be something that was mobile. It needed to be able to be moved very easily from, if you were in business, you could bring it home with you, set it up at home, and vice versa.
Let's talk a little bit about the logo, because the way that I understand it, it was Rob who came up with the concept, but it was you who initially drew it. Am I accurate in that statement?
Yeah, that's correct. Rob was a senior art director, but working on the advertising side. Around that time, one of the things that Regis did is that he would create teams with people. He would say, okay, I'm going to put this person and this person on this team. And he would always obviously put me into a team. If there was going to be any drawing involved, they were going to be giving it to me because I was basically the illustrator. The art directors would like just comp something up very quickly. We called them thumbnail sketches. They were usually very quick little, almost like you could call them napkin sketches, much like Picasso would do and stuff like that. This was a process, a way that art directors would work. They would just very quickly create something. They might create a half a dozen of different potential ideas. And we went through a process of elimination with Steve Jobs and with Rob Janoff and myself. By the second meeting that we had with Steve Jobs, he put his finger on this little thumbnail sketch that had been drawn of a little apple with a bite out of it, and it had some color stripes. Again, it was just a small, probably about this round of a sketch, and that's what was handed to me and said, have you developed this into a little bit larger shape? Let's see how you work all the things out. Of course, being the designer that I am, I was able to sketch things out pretty tight. And we went back and forth a few times about tweaking this or tweaking that. And by the way, Steve Jobs wanted it to be an apple because he wanted to have it be in front of the word Atari, because he used to work on Atari. And he wanted Apple because Apple was ahead in the alphabet, and the stuff would always be shown before Atari.
That's so funny. That reminds me of the old, like the Yellow Pages, how they used to have AAA handyman or
Right.
something, just so they could be on top of the.
Or the word Acme, right?
Yeah,
The word Acme.
like Bugs Bunny's company or Bugs Bunny cartoons. Yeah, that's.
I believe that one of the other reasons that he called it Apple was that his original offices were in a city here in the valley called Cupertino. It's just north of San Jose, a few miles. And Cupertino, when back in the day, was predominantly apple orchards in that area.
Oh, wow.
So I think that might have been also an influencing thing. But I think probably his biggest influence is that it was ahead of the word Atari.
That's so funny.
And I made all the final tweaks. We finally got to a point where we showed the final tweaks to Steve Jobs, and he goes, yeah, let's see what it's going to look like in color. We went ahead and laid it all out in color, showed it to him, and he loved it. And they wanted to move forward with that.
Was Steve Jobs as direct and as, shall we say, unpleasant as some of the stories that are out there about him and your experience with working with him?
It's really interesting because I had experiences with Steve where he would come into the agency, he would poke around to see what we were doing. And as an artist, I seemed to get along just fine with Steve. He would come over and look at all the drawings that I was doing for various different projects. We were doing everything from his letterhead to the first Apple magazine. And we were doing posters. We were doing what you call spec sheets, the specifications, if you will, of the components. So he would come over, look at the various different things, and every once in a while he would say, "Hey, can you make a copy of that for me? I would like to have a copy of that." And one of those things, at the time I was developing the inside of a newsletter. I was creating the newsletter for him, and I had created the first Apple newsletter, both as a designer and also as the production of it, because during that time we were still doing production. I was developing the little icons for each section of the newsletter, and he saw this one called patches. At the time, they were having to do a lot of patchwork because there was bugs in the process of developing the components or whatever. The language was Pascal, and so they were needing to make some adjustments, and those adjustments would be called patches. So it was a fix on something that they were getting hiccups on or whatever.
Sure.
And so he wanted an icon that said patches. I created a patch that looked like patches on your Levi's or whatever to cover up the hole that you had in your jeans. So I created a little symbol that looked like a patch, but it had an upward scale showing progress, upward progress. And he really liked that. And he came over, "Boy, I really like this symbol that you created." I also created a symbol for him that he also liked called "Out of the Mist." And "Out of the Mist" was basically something intangible, you know? And so what I did is I created a little cloud with little sort of specks of looking so like the cloud was a little misty. And he liked that symbol too. And it's very interesting because now today we think of that little symbol that I created back then as the cloud. So you could see how it transitioned that mentality of this thing being out of the mist, intangible sort of data that could be generated by a system that would basically be able to create things out of the mist, so to speak, or now we call it the cloud. That's a nice little symbol that I initially created. And also those drawings and illustrations also found themselves into the magazine. As I said, I created the masthead of the word Apple, all in lowercase, using a very simple contemporary font. And we also, during that time, we also merged the word Apple Computers Inc. We had to do that for their stationery and for business cards and stuff like that. And where we tucked in the A into the byte of the logo.
Yeah.
The other thing that we had during that time was the very first glossary of terms that were being used by these techie people that were creating components like this. And so the newsletter was a group newsletter being sent out to people that were tinkering around with the new technology of embedded circuitry and stuff like that. They had created a glossary of terms. And one of the terms inside of there is the word byte, but not spelled like the way you would spell bite, but it was B-Y-T-E, byte. Or you could say bit, the word bit as well. So the fact that the Apple logo has a byte relates to the fact that we were working with a technology company, with a
Interesting.
company
Never thought about that.
that gave it some reference. Steve wanted an apple, okay? And he wanted an apple because the logo that he had previously was an illustration of Isaac Newton underneath an apple tree with an apple in his hands. And it was very much an illustration. It wasn't an icon. And he was looking for something simple, something iconic, and something that would just very quickly say Apple. So we looked at the variations of different ways of biting into the apple. I remember exploring the possibilities that could have teeth marks. But eventually we went with something even simpler than that, and just simply a curve that was basically the same shape as the leaf. And in some ways, in my mind, when I was developing it, playing around with those shapes, I made the leaf the same shape as the bite. So that if you take the bite of the apple and you put it up on top, it became the leaf of the apple. pretty much that's the way that whole thing was developed. I still have my original sketches.
So that's something I wanted to ask you. I seen the photo that you have in your studio. That was the first drawing ever of what we all know as the Apple logo. Is that correct?
That's right. Back in the day, you had to create a few different drawings for an item. Okay. And the reason why was that when you were doing a logo this size, you wanted it to be sharp. So we usually would draw it initially at around about 4 or 5 inches or so high. And then if we were going to do blow-ups of it, then we had to actually do a bigger drawing. So I actually have tissues of both the smaller version that I inked, and I also have the larger version of the inking drawing.
I don't know if you've seen this online, so it's okay if you haven't, but I often see people online take the Apple logo and place circles around it and the rule of thirds and the golden ratio, and they talk about how perfect the logo is. And the question that I have is, was all that on your mind when you were creating the logo?
Absolutely. One of the principles that I learned at San Jose State was developing things with the golden rectangle in mind. Those ratios are very important in terms of making something. Let's say you want something to be very iconic, then you want to use those ratios. In this case, we're developing around a circle. Everything that is based on a circle and a square. So yes, absolutely. I was aware of the golden ratio because I had learned that at San Jose State.
Yeah.
So did Rob. By the way, Rob also attended San Jose State.
Oh, wow.
as well. So I'm sure he was aware of that as well.
It's very interesting because I read a lot of stuff about design in general, and I've often seen the Apple logo with different artists overlaying, different types of things on it to explain why it's such a great logo. And I've always wondered, I wonder if the original artist was thinking about that or it just so happens to fall into place. But I'm glad to know now for you drew it for the first time, that all that was in your mind, that it was very well thought out.
But by the way, the value of the brand value of Apple Computers Inc. today is pushing somewhere in the $360 billion.
That's insane.
That's a direct reflection of what Regis McKenna, as an agency, what we put into it to make it become that brand.
How does it make you feel to have one of your art pieces, and I know other people were involved, but something that you just basically drew on a piece of paper eventually becomes what is perhaps the most well-known logo of all time?
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very, it's incomprehensible to some degree. I mean, you think about where I came from, my roots as a child, growing up in El Chante, Jalisco. We have always been able to prove people wrong, so to speak, about our capacity and our capability and so forth.
And you know what? I'm sorry for interrupting, Carlos, but there's something I really, really want to ask you that I think relates to what you're talking about, because I think is very important for people listening. You not only have the Apple logo, the original sketch in your office, but you also, as I understand it, have a farm tool in your studio to remember you working in the farms as a teen. Why is that important to you?
Well, because that's my roots. I mean, I started out, I used to go work in the fields. So my mom would take me usually on a weekend. And we would go and pick cherries, or we would go and plow fields. A bunch of us in high school, that was one way that we could very easily go get a quick job and make some money so that we can, sport some new clothes and stuff like that. And so, the field hands to work for a day as a day laborer was easy for us to do. And so we would jump on one of the labor buses that would meet at a certain location. And so we would go out to work for, 35 cents a bucket of tomatoes. And we were hoeing weeds like we used to do with the short hoe, which I still have my short hoe. I held on to that guy, and it meant something. By this time, I knew who I was and those kinds of things. So for me, it's always been important to hold on to the things that you're working, your tools that you use. For instance, I still have the tools that I used to create the Apple logo with. At Delta College, I had bought a lot of tools that you needed in drafting. And those are basically the tools that I used to create the Apple logo. There were T-squares, French curves, and so forth to be able to draw good, clean black and white lines. The rapidograph pen could give you the sharpest line that you could draw. And so all these tools were very important in the process, just the same way that the hole was a good tool to sort of weed out the weeds around a betabel, sugar
Yeah.
beets. So I like to hold on to the things that I work with. So I still have the original tools that I created the Apple logo with, and would like to see if I can donate some of that stuff to the Smithsonian Institute or whatever. If they
I'm
want
sure
to
they
have the
would.
original that created the Apple logo, I'd be happy to
I
provide
think it's
that.
really interesting. It shows who you are as a person, that even though you reach the level of success that most designers would only dream of getting to, you're still holding on to that, to your roots. The whole farm working thing. You mentioned of being a day laborer, and you still see that today. You can go drive down any Home Depot in California, at least, I'm assuming the country, and you'll see day laborers standing there asking for work. And any one of these guys could be the next person who designs the next Apple logo, whatever that logo is. It's going to be recognized worldwide, and
Absolutely.
that to me is something incredible. I mentioned earlier that I was a farm worker for a day. When I was about 15 years old, I lived in Southern California in the Coachella Valley, and out there they have a lot of dates. There's a lot of date palm trees, and my uncle asked me if I wanted to make some money, and I said, "Sure, I'm 15 years old. Sure." So we went out and we picked dates, and I just remember it being the most grueling, most difficult work ever. And that day, I thought to myself, there is no way that I'm going to be able to do this again. Like, I got to go to school and learn how to do something. So graphic design was what I learned how to do.
Imagine I used to hoe weeds with this short hole. And I remember rolling into the aisle. They had little channels where water would feed the
Yeah.
plant. And I would lay inside those on my back because my back was hurt
Oh my
so
God.
badly. Then I would just lay there just in agony, if you will. But I also want to say that's part of the process, right? That we go through trying to find our way or in ourselves into what we want to become. But I also give enormous credit to my aunts who saw that I had some inkling of being a creative person, because they're the ones that sort of nurtured my life and began to nurture me as a creative person by sending me to learn how to paint and draw by my aunt. It takes a village, if you will, to get us to where we're going. I have this saying that I'll write about in my literature. An idea can turn to dust or magic depending on the talent that rubs against it. Okay?
Mm.
And so the magic that is rubbed against whoever initiated for you to become a creative person because they saw it in you, they're part of that process.
Hmm.
And then from there, you're rubbing against your peers, you're rubbing against your teachers, you're rubbing against new techniques and new art forms and so forth that you learn along the way. And so all those things become the magic that rubs against it, right? So you have an idea of what you want your life to be. And so you rubbing yourself and becoming a sponge for the things that will nurture that creativeness inside you is extremely important. But most important, I have to say, also includes those individuals that you also have rubbed against that helped you find your way. Just like that teacher that said to me, Mr. Williams said to me one day at Delta College, don't come to my class. Go to Wayne Thibault's class. You're going to learn a lot about painting there. Mr. Williams, I had a chance to actually exhibit those drawings at Delta College. He was so moved by the fact that I went on to actually do this. And he goes, man, I sure am glad that I sent you to that class because it seemed like it really made a big difference. Bless his soul, but everything and everything is so important.
I completely agree.
Also, a little quick short story. I was
Yeah.
lost in Mexico City at the age of 2 for 2 days.
Oh
I
my
got
God.
lost in Mexico City. My mom, of course, was besides herself, and she was praying to the Virgen de Guadalupe for them to find me. And I was found. What was really odd, though, was that we could never figure out how did I get from the playground where the sitter had taken us during that day, but she
Mhm.
had a boyfriend, and so her attention got sidetracked
Mm.
from watching us kids. And before I knew it, I used to be sort of like wanting to wander. My mom said that I always would take off on her. So she was always afraid that I would do that. And sure enough, I did that one day, and they could not find me. And
Wow.
eventually, when they did find me, though, it was interesting, is that they couldn't figure out how did I get from there all the way to the airport where they found me. They found me underneath a tree where I was watching the airplanes coming and going.
How far was that distance, by the way?
It was about a mile away from the airport where we lived.
Wow. That's far for a little kid.
Yeah. And so they don't know if somebody might have picked me up with the intention of putting me somewhere publicly so that I could be seen and found. But that's how it transpired. But what was interesting to my mom is that when they found me, she found inside my mouth that I had some bits of apple that somebody must have given
Wow.
me. And so that was a very interesting. My mom told me this story way before this whole apple thing started. But it
Mhm.
was interesting to her that somebody tried to feed me and give me
Wow.
something to chew on.
It was that missing piece.
Yeah, it was these little pieces of apples. She says you were eating little pieces of apples that somebody had must have provided them to you, or don't know how it must have
Wow.
been a vendor, like a little vendor or
Uh-huh.
something.
Now, Carlos, we're running out of time, and I do like to end the show with a series of lightning round questions. So you can give me a short answer, a longer answer, completely up to you. The first question I really wanted to ask you is, are you an Apple or Android user?
I've always been an Apple user. I have
Not
all
so.
the bells and whistles.
Hmm.
Now we have our iPhones,
Yeah.
and our smart watches and stuff like that.
What is the most valuable professional lesson you learned, then translated into your personal life?
Discipline. You have to have discipline in both places,
Right.
whether it's business or whether it's personal.
I definitely agree. Is there an insult you've received that you're particularly proud of? If so, why?
Yeah, oftentimes you sometimes you get pegged into to being only one thing. Like for instance, I don't like to have people only think of me as the artist that drew the Apple logo. One part of me, but I'll also have created other things that have touched the masses. For
Yes.
instance, I created a sculpture for Cinequest Film Festival called the Maverick Spirit Award, and it has been given to filmmakers of the highest caliber. Name a filmmaker, and I'll pretty much guarantee that person. Harrison Ford, I'll just throw out one name that has my sculpture in his collection of awards. The other one is La Estrella de Oro, was given to Selena, for instance. It was given to Jose Jose. It was given to Guadalupe Pineda. Some of the things that, sometimes getting pegged into, only doing one thing. No, I've been fortunate enough in my career and have had enough opportunities along my way where there's other things besides the one thing that I've come to
Right.
be known for. I have other things that I've also have made me be the person that I am today.
Definitely. And you know what? You actually answered my second question was going to be basically what you just answered. So I won't ask it. But the question was, besides the Apple logo, are there other artwork that you created that has impacted the masses? I even use that word. And there you go. You answered it for me. So that was a great answer.
Well,
The next question that I have for you is, how do you see the graphic design industry in general today compare as to when you were first starting out? Do you think it's the same? Do you think it's better? Obviously, technology is different. There's no real discussion there. But in terms of like creativity, do you think younger people have an easier time now? Is it more difficult? How do you see the whole industry now?
Well, I think in the advent of, in fact, I've been tinkering a lot. My son wrote some of the text in my story, and one of the words that he used in there, technophile, is
A
the word.
technophile. Okay.
Technophile. I somewhat consider myself a technophile
Hmm.
to a big degree, just because I've grown up, if you will, here in Silicon Valley. So much of it is about technology and so forth. Being a creative person with technical background abilities, I think gives you an edge. And so for me, especially with AI now, right?
Hmm.
A lot of
Hmm.
people are afraid of AI. I'm looking forward to it. I'm actually beginning to scratch the surface on how I, as a creative person, can utilize the tool of AI.
Wow.
Because remember, when the computer first came around, people were afraid of it. And they were
Hmm.
afraid of it because they were afraid that their jobs would be taken up by it.
Hmm.
Not so, not so. Don't be afraid of it. Be challenged by it. See what you can do with it.
Hmm.
As a creative person, you're never going to be robbed by technology. You can only maybe within that you can make it be even a better tool, right?
I
Artists have
agree.
always been able to, when color in the world at one time was pretty much black and white. Everything was black and white. All the advertising and so forth was black and white. When color was introduced, it was a difficult time for people because they didn't know how to use color. But once we learned how to use color effectively, we can actually use color very effectively to move people, to move your
Hmm.
feelings, to move your emotions, to move you to maybe purchase something or whatever.
Hmm.
And it's an important, very important tool to be
I
able
definitely
to
agree.
be accepting, challenge yourself, be challenged by it.
And Carlos, the last question I have for you is how can our listeners support you and your work? Where can people find you?
Well, let me put something out there. I'm going to be featured in a very well-known magazine in May.
Okay.
The magazine is called Content Magazine. It's published here in San Jose, in the heart of Silicon Valley.
Hmm.
Predominantly is focused on highlighting the creative careers of people
Hmm.
that create content. Their website is obviously contentmagazine.com.
Okay.
You can go to my website at artorigindesign.com.
Awesome. I will have those
Uh,
links in the show notes for people to just click on. And if you just heard it and write it down, that's fine too. Carlos, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here. There was so much more. I could probably talk to you for days just because you're a wealth of information. You've been involved in some incredible projects, and I just wish we had more time. But thank you so much for the time you gave now.
you're welcome. It's been a pleasure.